welcome to the Why Postliberalism Failed podcast. This is episode 10, and today is August 30th, 2024. Of course, with me is Thomas. I'm James Patterson. And we also have a guest. We have Don Eden Goldstein, who is a canon lawyer and an award-winning author of biography of Edward Dowling, Father Ed, the story of Bill W., spiritual sponsor, as well as Sunday Will Never Be the Same, and many other wonderful books. Born in New York, she began her working life as a rock and roll historian. She went on to editorial positions at the New York Post and the Daily News before publishing her first book in 2006. In 2016, she became the first woman to earn a doctorate in sacred theology from the University of Mary of the Lake, with her graduation from the Catholic University of America School of Canon Law in 2023. So she lives in Washington, D.C., and has taught at seminaries in the United States, England, and India. So she is a world traveler, a theologian, an author, an award winner. So what's not to like? Welcome to the podcast, Ms. Goldstein. And I realize now, is it Goldstein or Goldstein?
It's Goldstein, and it's
Uh,
Dr. Goldstein too. No, just kidding.
no,
You can call me
Dr.
Dawn.
Goldstein.
You can call me Dawn, and you're Dr. Patterson, and I'm talking to Dr. Hughes. So we're all on a first name basis here.
That's right. I'm regularly demoted by my kids' friends. And that's fine, because I went to the University of Virginia to get my PhD, and nobody there is supposed to go by doctor, because you're not supposed to have a rank that's higher than the founder. And since Jefferson didn't have a PhD, it's so bad.
Well,
Everything
just
UVA is so pretentious.
Just pretend that you're working for Jesuits. You'd be on a first name basis there as well.
That's right. That's great. Actually, that's great. Yeah, we should have one on. I know a few. All right, so we'll start with some questions. So tell us about your current project. This is an important thing that you're doing with Catholic priest who was a Jesuit. Speaking of the Jesuits, and the civil rights movement. So who was this priest, and what is his significance?
So I'm currently writing A Priest in Good Trouble, which is a biography of Father Louis J. Twomey, S.J., a Southern Jesuit born in Tampa in 1905, did most of his work in New Orleans at Loyola University, New Orleans, where he initially went to start a labor school in 1947. That was the age of kind of the tail end of the age of the labor priests. For any of you who have seen the Karl Malden character in On the Waterfront, you've seen something of the late or a depiction of the labor priest phenomenon of that time. But as soon as Father Tumi arrived in New Orleans, he realized that the labor problem there was intimately and inextricably tied up with the problem of racial discrimination, segregation. So basically, no sooner did he have his feet on the ground than he joined the Urban League, another group called the Southern Regional Council that was working against racial discrimination, and he became an advocate for African Americans. And one unusual thing about him is that whereas there was a pretty robust interracialism movement in Catholicism until 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, once the rubber really hit the road with the Supreme Court decision, a lot of liberals, not just Catholic liberals, but including a lot of Catholic liberals, just dropped out, because if you're in the South and Brown versus Board of Education is passed, then if you are going to still be against segregation for integration, you have to be prepared to get blown up and to have people beating you up, because that's when things got quite violent. And Father Tumi was called by one New Orleans African-American leader a voice in the wilderness for not just continuing his activism after Brown versus Board of Education, but stepping it up. And it was that same year, 1954, that a young African American leader who was just finishing up his doctorate at Boston University met Father Tumi, and they became friends. And that was Martin Luther King, the soon to become Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so for many, many years, at least until 1964, and I would say probably until closer to Dr. King's death, although it's hard to find a paper trail, but for many years, Father Tumi was uh, an ally of King, like personally, in terms of writing to him, supplying him with materials from the magisterium, the Catholic, teaching office of the Pope and the bishops, which King would then use to convince complacent Catholics to support civil rights. This work between King and Twomey was all behind the scenes. I'm the first researcher to discover it, and that's going to be important in my book. The other thing to know about Father Tumi is that in 1967, he was close to just a couple of years before his death, he was summoned to Rome by Superior General Father Pedro Arupe to write or co-draft along with another Jesuit, Father William Keneally of Boston College School of Law. Twomey and Keneally co-drafted the letter to the U.S. Jesuits on the interracial apostolate, which was the letter that really gave the Jesuits their marching orders to stop doing discriminatory practices, or permitting any discriminatory practices, and to be proactive in racial justice. So Father Tumi had a lasting legacy. I'm very grateful to be working on his biography now for the University of Notre Dame Press. And I just wrote an excerpt of it that's going to appear probably about the same time as this podcast in the Vital Center Journal and on the Vital Center's blog.
So there's a history here of Catholic opposition to racial injustice, and I was wondering what kind of continuity Toomey has with people like Archbishop John Ireland and Archbishop John Hughes. Were there an influence here, or is this more sort of like a cultural milieu he found himself in through his own life? I asked that. This is something of a surprise question, but I just wondered because it's a big deal that Hughes and Ireland stuck their necks out when they did.
That's a very good question. And the Hughes and Ireland history that you're describing, I know Ireland's 19th century. Hughes is late 19th century as
He's
well.
early 19th. He's before, yeah.
Early
Dagger John.
Oh, early
Yeah.
19th, right,
Yeah.
right. So Father Tumi was born in 1905. So I would say that where he would sort of pick up on the legacy of Hughes in Ireland would be through his admiration of Father John Lafarge, who was of
Okay.
the generation before him, and it was under Father Lafarge's direction that the Catholic Interracialist newsletter was published. I think there is some controversy in that the Catholic interracialist movement. There's some good material about this on the Catholic University of America library website. They have a whole section on this, and I can certainly send you the link to that you can then share with this podcast. But the Catholic interracialist movement under Lafarge and also under Father John Marcoux, another Jesuit, was in some sense wrested from African American leaders and kind of placed under white clerical leadership. So that was some controversy. And actually, one role that Father Tumi sought to play was that even though he was influenced by Lafarge, inspired by Lafarge, he really sought to center African American leadership. I think that's a major reason why he never went around telling people, hey, did you know that I'm advising Dr. Martin Luther King in letters? I think another reason was probably that he wanted to avoid bringing his own Jesuits into controversy, because, sadly, King was considered a controversial figure, and even people who might be his allies were sometimes careful in terms of how it was known that they were associated with him. But I think, beyond that desire to avoid controversy, I think Father Tumi, with King and with other leaders who were African American, he sought to center their own contribution rather than his. And I think that's another reason why he's not better known.
How did you get interested in this, or how did you come to learn about this? So you wanted to do some research, and what kind of, and then I'll have another question after that, but
Sure. So I had found at the Georgetown University Library on their book sales shelf, which they no longer have, many years ago, I guess about 2009, I found a slim book, less than 100 pages, that was a kind of vita of Father Tumi. It was called At Face Value by Father C.J. McNaspy. And that gave me kind of the outlines of Father Tumi's story. And then I saw in that book, or I learned maybe from a Jesuit friend, that the book was adapted from the dissertation of a Jesuit named Father John Payne. So I emailed Father Payne, asked him for a copy of his dissertation. He emailed it to me. And then that gave me a whole lot more information about Father Tumi. And I wasn't in any way considering writing about him. But then in 2022, through Orbis Books, I published my first biography, and this was of the Jesuit Father Edward Dowling, as mentioned at the top of the show. That's my book, Father Ed, The Story of Bill W.'s
that's right in the
spiritual
back
sponsor.
behind you, right? That's
right. Exactly. That's the cover, right below a letter from Pope Francis thanking me for Father Ed.
Oh,
Show
cool.
off.
Yes,
Where's my
have to
letter?
frame that. Well, hey, I don't have my fancy schmancy doctorate from Princeton, so I have to frame something behind me that's impressive.
Well, if we ever get Pope Francis to thank us for why post-liberalism failed, we will never shut up about it.
I'm just imagining what that would do to some people. That would,
Oh, I'd actually feel bad.
I would not feel bad. I would feel very good, because I'm not as good of a person as Tom.
No.
Well, on that note, so when my biography of Father Ed Dowling, who was a spiritual advisor to Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill Wilson, when that came out and people started to review it, well, I realized, my gosh, here I've been a Catholic author since 2006 with The Thrill of the Chaste, and now here I am. It's by then, 2022, and I was now, 50, and I had finally discovered what I'm good at. Apparently, what I'm good at is writing Jesuit biographies. So that was when I revisited the materials I had on Father Tumi, and I thought, here's another Jesuit who deserves to be better known.
Yeah, my second daughter, her middle name and the name we call her is Avery, after Avery Dulles. So there's some I have some Jesuits that I also admire as well.
Well, you'll be happy to know that he wrote that the young Mr. Dulles, before he was Father Avery Dulles, wrote for Father Tumi's newsletter. I think that may have been the first Jesuit publication that published him. Father Tumi had a newsletter, Christ's Blueprint for the South, on social justice. And I believe that the essay that Twomey published, I have a copy of it, but I believe the topic was it was for graduates of like Jesuit high schools on why you should go on to a Jesuit college.
That's funny. So that's so then I also have here your first biography, Father Ed. Um would you be interested in telling us a little bit about that too, actually?
Sure.
Because it seems to me like what is somebody, James knows more about this because my background's philosophy. So, the way we research sources is a lot different than the way you do as a biographer or as a historian, or right. Where did you have to go to get all the source material for this kind of research? And was it fun? Was it like a detective work? What's it like?
It's a lot of fun. So I've been doing detective work of one kind or another since my late teens, when I was interning for the oldies DJ Bob Shannon and helping him with his book Behind the Hits, which was on the stories behind oldies songs. So, back in 1986, 87, I was doing interviews with the Left Bank about their song "Walk Away, Renee," and that was kind of my introduction to primary sources. Go to the people who experience these things and interview them. And likewise, in my work as a rock journalist, I was discovering that there were also primary sources in terms of record charts. Find the original charts, find what was the chart position of Walk Away Renee when it entered the charts, and how many places did it jump between the week of such and such 1966 and the next week. So likewise, in researching Father Ed Dowling, I in this case, I couldn't interview him as a primary source, but I could interview his niece and nephew, who are the two surviving relatives with the best memories of him. I interviewed a number of other people who knew him or to whom he ministered, or people whom he helped find their vocation. And I also used different archives. Most notably, there is a Dowling archive at Maryville University in St. Louis, because Father Tumi's sister was the librarian at Maryville. So that's how Father Dowling's papers were very gently and beautifully stolen from the Jesuits.
Oh my goodness.
Well, not like literally stolen from. Well, yeah, they were. But yeah, I mean, they were. Father Tumi lived in a Jesuit house, and he had signed away all his belongings, all his possessions to the Jesuits, which is part of the standard. It's the SOP, standard operating procedure for when you enter the Jesuits. You sign everything away. It all belongs to them. And his two sisters, the lay sister who was his secretary and the sister who was the librarian, they just, packed everything up. We're taking this to the Maryville University Library. And there it has stayed since April 1960, when Father Dowling died. So that was the main archive I used. There's also materials of his in different AA-related archives that were helpful. And I also did a lot of newspaper research, which is thankfully far easier than it was when I was a rock and roll historian, because now it's possible to subscribe to online archives, which has been very helpful for my Father Tumi research as well.
Well, see, because my work has normally been only in ideas, but now I'm doing this book with James, and I'm still focused mostly on the ideas, but I'm also double as a sort of research assistant for James, where I'll like I'll find something that'll be like, okay, you should probably include this, or so that, like right now, somebody told me that they bought this memoir of the leader of the Christus Rex movement and the Rexus in Belgium, who
Leon
ended up,
Dugrel, right?
yeah, who ended up collaborating with the Nazis. And it was
He
only
fought
after
for the Waffen SS. That's some collaboration.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But there's only after my friend bought this book did he realize he had bought it from a European neo-Nazi website.
Oh my gosh, that
So-
does happen.
So I told him, I'm like, can you lend it to me so we don't have to give them money twice? Because I want to, so we get some source material.
Oh
So,
gosh. Yeah, you don't want that kind of cooperation. Definitely. I apologize. I was trying to reduce the sound of my headphones because you're coming through quite loud, and I accidentally muted you. So you might have said something terribly important just now that
Oh,
that
no.
I missed. Okay.
No. So, and then so the back to your story then, you told us you've gotten into this biography thing that you built out of your background as a rock and roll historian and journalist, right? But now that you have you have your doctorate in theology and in canon law, so you've allowed, it's given you a different perspective on things. Tell us a little bit about your conversion. You said that you converted in 2006. What did you convert from? How did that work out? How did that?
Well, thank you for asking. I did enter the church in 2006. I actually became Christian in 99. So I had been raised Jewish, Reformed Jewish, and after my parents' divorce, I was raised by my mom, and my mom was experimenting with different new age things. For a while, she was going to New York to listen to a guru named Hilda, who said that aliens were coming. Actually, Hilda was saying that there was going to be a terrible famine, but everything was going to be okay because aliens would take us away. So it was around that time that I was in high school, and I was familiar with the Gospels because I'd had an 8th grade social studies teacher at public school who told his class, mostly Jewish, that if we were going to understand European history, we had to first spend a couple of weeks reading the Gospels.
Wow.
Kind of amazing, I'm sure that any integralists listening are like, yay! But anyway.
That's more than
In
you get at
Defense of
some...
Cultural Christianity by Don Eden Goldstein.
Gosh. So anyway, so when I was in high school, I was looking at colleges with my mom, and we were at Rutgers, New Brunswick, and there was a table in the student union with free Good News Bibles, and my mom picked up one of the Bibles, and with the Gospels, and said, what do you think, Don? Should I read this? And I was so eager for my mom to start believing something normal that I just said, yes, Mom, you should. We read it in social studies. It was good. So my mom takes the Gospels home, reads them, gets to like the Beatitudes and blessed are you when they persecute you. She had had a difficult childhood, and she gets to that, and it's like, whoosh, Holy Spirit, she's converted. Mom becomes Catholic. And meanwhile, I'm just like doing my teenage thing, like whatever, okay, I guess mom's no longer going to a guru now. That's good. Mom's happier. That's good. And I just kept doing my thing. I was definitely searching. I was suffering from some trauma myself, from different bad things that happened in my childhood. But I just however much I wanted faith, I didn't receive it until after many Saint Monica style prayers from my mom, and from my stepfather as well, who was also Christian by then but not Catholic. I had a faith experience in 99 that convinced me that God really existed and that Jesus was his son. But I felt that I didn't need to be Catholic to be Christian, which is true, strictly speaking. And certainly, we have to we have to believe that with teachings of the council. But I now know as a Catholic that if you're baptized, your heart and soul is telling you to go to the heart of the church, which is the Catholic, the Catholic Church. I should tell you also that an important part of my journey prior to my faith experience was Chesterton. So as a rock and roll journalist, I was doing an interview with by phone with a member of a band, power pop band called the Sugar Plastic, and I thought I'd ask this singer a really, bright and intellectual question to show how smart I was. So I asked him what he was reading nowadays, and he said he was reading G.K. Chesterton's The Man Who Was Thursday. No idea who Chesterton was, but I went and picked up that book, and I was bowled over by Chesterton's account of suffering having meaning. Of course, for Chesterton, suffering had meaning in Christ. And, I thought that was really kind of fascinating and mysterious. So I read all the Chesterton I could. I actually befriended Dale Ahlquist at that time. Strangely enough, neither Dale Ahlquist, the president of the American Chesterton Society, as it was called at that time, neither he nor I was Catholic at that time. He was still kind of on his way into the church. So it was 4 years of reading Chesterton, after which I became Christian, and just fought being Catholic because I didn't want more rules. I thought I had signed on to enough rules just getting baptized, generic Protestant. But then, what happens? But I, eventually find myself with all the rules of Catholicism and being a canon lawyer. But I'll tell you something interesting just for what's in the headlines right now. What actually got me into the church was a series of events that happened when I was fired from the New York Post for making unauthorized alterations. I was a copy editor, and I was making unauthorized alterations to a story about IVF that was celebrating IVF. And I was angry in reading this, even though I was still a Protestant. It's like, hey, as a Protestant, you don't necessarily have a dog in the fight with regard to IVF. But, well, as Christians, we do. But still, it's not normally something, opposition to IVF is not normally associated with Protestantism. But I knew that IVF was a process in which embryos were destroyed. And I was given this story about women with uterine cancer who were having last chance miracle babies through IVF. And the story said 3 embryos were implanted in this one woman and 2 took, and now she has miracle babies. And I thought, well, there's a death here. So we have to say 1 died, 2 took. And we have to include something about how, IVF is like this Russian roulette for embryos. There are always going to be deaths, or almost always going to be deaths involved when you do this kind of thing. So I, in my great convert's zeal, made these unauthorized changes, and the reporter wanted my head on a platter when the story came out with my changes. And as I was in my cubicle waiting to be fired, I thought, gosh, I could really use someone in heaven praying for me right now. And as much as I believe that Jesus was in heaven praying for me, I thought I need a saint. And so I went online, looked up patron saint of journalists, found St. Maximilian Kolbe, had never heard of him, started reading the story about how he, well, first I read about how he sheltered 2,000 Jews at his friary during, after the Nazi invasion of Poland. And then I got to the point of his story where he, at Auschwitz, offered himself to die in place of a Polish soldier who had a wife and children. And then I got to the end where I saw that the Polish soldier whose life Kolbe saved was present at Kolbe's canonization. And I just broke down crying, and I did what my Catholic friends have been trying to get me to do. I said, "Dear St. Maximilian, I'm in trouble. I'm about to be fired. Please pray for me." And the moment I asked St. Maximilian Kolbe's prayers, I had what I wish would happen every time I asked a saint's prayers, which is that I just felt this whoosh, come down from heaven. I felt, you know, I know we can't feel grace. That's what the Catechism says, but darn it, I felt the effects of grace then and there. I felt like I was in the eye in the middle of the storm, and that no matter what happened to me, I was going to be okay, because there was a little Franciscan friar in heaven who was praying for me before the throne of God. And so I was fired, but I had the blessing of knowing that that there was, you know, real hope for me, and not just because I got quickly hired by the Daily News after that. But I after that I became Catholic, and of course, being the Catholic Church, they wouldn't take me in right away. I had to wait a year with the new, you know, RCIA crew in 2006, and haven't looked back since then.
So at the Daily News, was that awkward with how you got fired? How did
Yes,
that come up?
it was very awkward, and I didn't help myself. I did myself no favors at the Daily News, because, you know, here, you know, the editors were kind of pulling for me. They wanted me because I had been a top headline writer at the Post, and they wanted funny headlines at the Daily News. And they liked the idea of hiring someone with Post experience. At the Post, I had won an Associated Press award for my witty headline, and I even had a funny headline when I was being walked out of the Post carrying my box with my things. I shouted out a headline that they used on their front page, because the Sunday after my firing was was it the Sunday after my firing? It was the weekend after my firing was the Donald Trump Melania wedding, and they needed what they called a wood for the front page. They called the front page headline the Wood. They still do, I'm sure, because it used to be set up with wooden type, you know, those huge letters. So they had kind of asked around, they had crowdsourced for a wood for the Donald Melania wedding. And as I was walking out, I shouted out, "Milt for Sunday, lady is a Trump." And that's what they used. So you know, the Daily News knew what they were getting, but when I say I did myself no favors, what I mean is that I had a blog, the Dawn Patrol, where I was being what liberals would call strident about my, you know, newfound, very right-wing culture wars faith. When I mean, I wasn't ultra right. I was, having grown up Jewish, I knew enough to be scared of the ultra right. But I was still, you know, using all those culture war, you know, terms that one shouldn't necessarily use. And in one case, I wrote something while at the Daily News on my blog about how badly I did not want my tax dollars going to pay for condoms, and I used inflammatory, offensive language, and one of my colleagues saw it and printed it up, and I almost got fired for it. I apologized. This time I didn't get fired, because, you know, I think they knew it was a kind of First Amendment gray area, because I hadn't actually signed something on the job that said that my writings off the job could get me fired. But I did apologize, and, you know, I was told, you know, then and there by this colleague that if my name ever came up for a promotion, he was going to show them this thing that I'd written, even though I'd apologized. You know, I was canceled from then on, effectively, as far as promotions went. So that was what led me to seek work outside the news. And, you know, thank God I did. I'm not happy about what led me to become persona non grata to some of my colleagues there, but I'm happy to have gotten out of the newspaper biz, given where it went after you know, that time, when I finally did walk away from the news in 2007.
What was your favorite headline you ever made? Just
Oh
curious.
gosh, there are a lot of them. I'll tell you my dad's favorite headline that I ever made, when Cheney shot his friend. Remember that? They were duck
Yeah. Oh
hunting.
man, that
Yes.
was something, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Cheney apologized.
And then,
And then the
well,
question,
no. Wait. The lawyer apologized first.
that's correct. Very true. But Cheney did
He
apologize.
did, okay.
And so, the editors go around and they try to crowdsource a front page headline. And since it was duck hunting, I came up with the winning headline, I fouled up, FOWLED.
That's good. That's good.
But I did have an award-winning, a Associated Press award-winning headline, which is the one that most people remember, when those who knew about me at that time. That was when I was at the Post. There was a guy who worked at the Brooklyn courthouse who was taking a bathroom break, and he was mildly injured when the toilet bowl fell under him. So he was suing the city over this. And the fact that it was a mild injury meant for the New York Post, funny headline. Toilet, mild injury, funny headline. If it were a serious injury, then, no funny headline. So I wrote hurt in line of duty, and that's how you win Associated Press awards, my friends.
That's fun. That's great. Have you ever been able to use that headline writing skill for like your for I mean, you probably use that with your own writing now, don't you?
Yes, I do, and I still get asked, on occasion, to write funny headlines. I remember there was a time when I even had a contact who worked for the House or Senate, who would write to me and say, "We're putting out this press release for Representative so and so, and we need a headline." I love that. I'm available, and yeah, I enjoy headline writing so much that, we'll work we'll consult for free.
Well, that connects you and James, because James has some pretty good titles for his articles online too, I think. So that you two have that in common, I think.
Excellent.
What's your favorite title you had for a article, James?
Oh, I think the one that got me in the most trouble was why integralism is an ideology of despair.
Oh, okay.
I didn't. It's just because the reason is because I take for granted that it is, and people were like, no, it couldn't possibly be.
Well, James, I remember there was one where like the whole thing, you wrote such a good title that it was just like it was like half the work was just that title. One time you had
that's the one on Adrian. He wrote Adrian Vermeil wrote a book called Common Good Constitutionalism, and my review is called Uncommonly Bad Constitutionalism. I mean, this isn't even close to Line of Duty. All right, like, but I'm not. We're not.
Yeah.
We're not trying to say.
But have you?
These are the poor man
noticed,
versions of what you were doing.
Have you noticed that integralists are not known for having a sense of humor?
It's a good point.
Not the first thing that comes up.
No, they're usually very mad, and they're mad. But they're also very flexible on on the urgency of life issues when they're in their political candidates they support.
Indeed, they are. Yes, we have learned that very recently.
So those of you who are listening this out of sync for when this happened, we're recording shortly after Donald Trump has announced his desire to fund IVF treatments, and post-liberal JD Vance is nowhere to be found.
May I say something about that? I mean, I don't know how permissible it is to get into candidates and political issues here, because I understand that the vital center is at the center, and you don't yourself endorse something, but you don't yourself endorse candidates. But may I say something from my perspective about Trump and IVF? Thanks. So I just want to say that when I was fired from the Post for making a pro-life change to a pro-IVF story, what really shocked people, like in the mainstream media, was that someone could possibly be too pro-life for the New York Post. you know, in the mainstream media's language, I was too right-wing for the Post. This became actually a cover story by George Gurley in the Observer. I think the main headline was Eden in Exile, and then I think the subhead was Chipper canned copy editor is right of Rupert, something like that. Certainly Gawker also did a whole like kind of series of articles on this shockingly ultra right-wing pro-life postie. And just to be clear, my right-wing credentials at that time were IVF, like full stop. That was enough to put me well outside the mainstream. And then I find my cozy home in not just the Catholic Church, which I love and which is my mother, but also with the conservative pro-life Catholics. I mean, even before I was hired by the Daily News, Catherine Lopez, just to help me pay my rent, hired me to do freelance web editing for National Review Online. And as a newly minted pro-life Catholic, I did writing for NRO as well as for First Things, Weekly Standard. I was embraced by that crew. And so over the Trump years, I have seen these really pro-life super Catholics, with notable exceptions, such as Maria McFadden of Human Life Review, Lila Rose now, most recently, with notable exceptions of those who are, you know, honest enough to stand and say to the Trump campaign, "What are you doing?" I've seen one by one these friends of mine and comrades of mine in the Catholic pro-life world just peel off to the cult of Trump. And it's like, you know, Animal Farm or something. I don't know where they start by saying, well, you know, he's not the most moral person, but he'll get us what he wants. And then they take one concession after another until they're fully on board with this man who has never had their interests at heart, and who is, you know, harming the very you know, fundamentals of democracy, the very mechanics of democracy that would protect life and enable us to have a true culture of life. I recently wrote about this in a thread for Twitter, that I haven't changed. I'm still anti-IVF. I mean, you know, as I shared with you, I'm not strident anymore in terms of my culture war, you know, language. And you know, I will say that, you know, when Pope Francis says that we should listen to and accompany, you know, people, I believe that, and I've softened in that sense. But certain things, such as the dignity of human life, don't change, or the truth about God's creation with regard to marriage. Those things don't change. So it just greatly grieves me to now be counted by my old friends among the left, you know, a left Cath, because of simply not buying into this cult of Trump.
Yeah, James and I know something about that too. Yeah. Now, but I mean, you probably have taken some pushback because of your opposition to Trump, we've seen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, I have, but honestly, it's not as bad as the pushback that I've gotten simply for writing for Where Peter Is, and for you know, being friendly with people who have problems with traditionalism and integralism. Oddly enough, in the Catholic online world, you want to get troll, you want to get the groypers on you and whatever, unleash those troll armies. Just say something against the closely held tenets of traditionalism, and that will get it worse than saying anything even against Trump.
Yeah, Yeah, no, that's right. No, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about this because James and I have had different experiences, and sometimes it's hard to know what the situation is within the American Catholic Church and the conservatives in the American Catholic Church because there's not exactly what you see online is not the same thing as that you see offline.
Yes.
And I'm always nice when I go to church every Sunday. It's always nice to see so many normal people there at church
Yeah.
because
Thank
I go
God.
online and it's not very normal, you know.
Right, right.
But what is your experience with younger serious Catholics? Do you think that they have a tendency towards radicalism these days, or is that just
Yes.
online? Okay.
Yes, very much so. Now, granted, you can take it with something of a grain of salt because, I'll tell you quite honestly, I know a lady should never tell her age, but I'll be 56 September 3rd.
Mhm.
And so, for me, younger is like 40
Hey,
and younger.
young.
You two are, are very well degreed tykes, so um but yes, part of my experience though is that I've gone to theological school and canon school for canon law with much younger people. When
Mhm.
I was starting in theology, I was just turning 40, and I was going to school at the Dominican House of Studies with Dominicans who were little more than half my age. They were just out of the novitiate, so these were men in their maybe mid mid 20s. So I do have some experience being up close with certainly with men studying for the priesthood who are of the generation younger than me, and I it and I've also taught them at seminary in England and at Holy Apostles here in the States. So it is my experience that they are being formed, or rather malformed, by, it used to be by the blogs, now it's by social media. And I think we've certainly seen this happen even in the case of bishops with people like Strickland, um, where when these people go online to social media, they get reinforcement by a certain group of people with a certain type of ideologies, and that pushes them further to the edge. Many people have said that Strickland, as a pastor, was a great pastor. Um, one generally doesn't become a bishop by falling up. Sometimes, but not
Mhm.
generally. Generally, there's some sort of skill that someone, has, and in the case of someone who was a pastor, they've been a good pastor. So Strickland's a classic example of someone who was on the side of sanity, and then whatever weaknesses he had got pushed by the um, kind of negative reinforcement that he was getting in the online world.
Mhm.
There's a funny problem of the Thomism to crank pipeline where you'll have someone who's like, I'll defend the Catholic Church against charges made to it by people who are like Protestants or on the left, and then over time with the reinforcement both from negative feedback but also in terms of engagement generally is the craziest stuff they said. And so by
That's
the
right.
end of it, you have like Taylor Marshall talking about the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy. It's just sort of like, if you go back all the way, he was
I
just,
knew him then.
yeah, he
He
was
was
normal.
fine. He was just writing
Mhm.
about Thomism, and he was actually, as I recall, he would even defend the church's more recent teachings against anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
He genuinely changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really sad. I was told by somebody who spoke to a vice rector at a major seminary, I won't say which one, like 2 or 3 years ago, and they said that all the young seminarians were big fans of Taylor Marshall. And right, even 2, 3 years ago, I was like, oof, you guys need to get better theology than that. But now since then, Taylor Marshall's, like we said, he's counting the number of Jews and things, and it's just not very good at all. Yeah, I mean, you just pray for him. I mean, I think it's like you said, it's like that's like an audience capture that they get, these people with a lot of big followings.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it's almost like some people have described it. It's almost like possession in a certain sense. It's not very. It's not a good thing.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah. So you've been seeing that too. Okay. So James and I aren't alone. Okay. Because
No, you're definitely not alone.
whenever we bring
I get hate for pointing it out. They're like, oh, they're doing important work, and I was like, I don't know how important it is to count Jews. It's it's frowned on.
And walking in this room, Jews are overrepresented in this room. That's an issue.
Yeah. It's a funny story because especially when it comes to things like the press and film, original reason why there was an overrepresentation of Jews relative to population and Italians, by the way, is because they were the only ones who would do it back in the early 20th century. These were not reputable things to do. And so good blue stocking Yankee types wouldn't be caught dead near it because it would be bad for their reputation. So Jews and Italians opened Nickelodeons and they were off to the races. Mm-hmm. So I have to sometimes do some students coming to Ave will sometimes have Taylor Marshallisms that I have to kind of deactivate. Like I had someone ask me if it was true the Constitution was a Masonic dish rag, and I was like, no. They're like, weren't the founders all Masons? And I was like, well, some of them were. And they're like, so they were anti-Christian, and I was like, what? And I know. And I had
James,
to. So James, sorry.
I can't recall the last time anyone made me snort. So congratulations.
So James, what were Masonic lodges in colonial America like in like the 1770s? Was it basically
they would drink the blood of Catholic innocents and then no. So they were just drunk guys. And, like there were some really bad lodges in Italy and in France that were up to no good, but like the lodges in America were just like for fancy people who wanted to make deals and get drunk.
Well, that's quite true, actually, and I certainly know from my from hearing about my grandparents' time that for many people, Jews included, if you were in the business world and you wanted to be successful, the lodges were something you had to join. Mm-hmm. And they didn't see it as something that was any kind of religion. Mm-hmm. They simply saw it as being like in the Oddfellows or something.
Right. Mm-hmm. There's a funny tension between the American clergy of the later 19th century who are saying, hey man, we got Catholics in the lodge here, I understand why you guys are stressed out over there. And it was this massive cultural gap between what was going on in America and the sort of civic association sort of nature of the mm-hmm. lodge versus some of the more conspiratorial stuff going on in Europe. And so much of which was overstated, of course, but yeah, there was and this is actually what leads to the formation of the Knights of Columbus, is for Catholics to have a kind of version of that themselves. And so I'm a knight, desperately trying to preserve the secret of the Vatican space laser.
Well, if I might bring this back to Father Louis J. Twomey,
sure. Mm-hmm.
A lot of Father Toomey's story has to do with his efforts to convince the Knights of Columbus in the South to integrate. So Father Tumi was a 4th degree knight. His dad, Tim Twomey, was a knight, and Father Tumi took great pride in being a knight. But once he became active in civil rights, it really grieved him that the knights in the South were not admitting African Americans. To this day, the Knights of Columbus have failed really to come clean about this in at least their online materials. It's up to scholars to say like, well, no, actually, blah, 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 because the Knights will play up that the original that the original councils were integrated, and that, even I think under Father McGivney, there were, or at least maybe was one, African American knight. But the very sad truth is that for a very long time in the Jim Crow South, no African Americans were permitted. So one of the interesting things that I found in my Father Tumi research is I've found that Father Tumi made national headlines by giving talks to the Knights of Columbus against segregation back in, we're talking 1950.
That's amazing. So I suppose that, I mean, I remember hearing about that too, like the seminaries in like the 1950s and 60s, a lot of times, even if they had a black seminarian, they faced a lot of discrimination at the time.
That's right.
But so it wasn't, the good old days weren't always as good as people think they were. There's a lot of things that have gotten better, even if we have new problems. That seems to be a continuous theme that James and I are running into.
Well, that's correct. And I think there are certain similarities to today in terms of that there are good things that the bishops would say as a group, and then there was timidity among individual bishops, individual priests, in terms of doing the right thing. So like, we could say, today with Pope Francis, the US bishops will say positive things about Pope Francis and synodality, but then when it comes to actually, on an individual level, promoting synodality and promoting other things that are priorities for Francis, we don't always see that. And likewise, the US bishops in 1958 issued a statement called Discrimination and the Christian Conscience, which was a beautiful statement against racial discrimination. Even then, actually, it was only issued after Pope Pius XII, on his deathbed, sent a telegram to the US bishops ordering them to issue that immediately, because they had sent it to him for review. And he, on his deathbed, telegrammed, this must go out right now. And that was actually the last communication from Pius XII.
Oh, God.
Amazingly enough, go Pius XII. I'm a big Pius fan.
Yeah.
So the U.S. bishops did have this statement in 1958, but it was on a practical level very hard in 1958 to find individual priests, bishops who would speak out in favor of what African American leaders were trying to do to end segregation. Even in the case of Martin Luther King, we have Father Albert Foley, a Jesuit who was friends with Father Tumi, who was at Father Foley was at Spring Hill College, and Father Foley had himself done many things that were very, very positive for racial justice. I mean, he should go down ultimately as one of the heroes in racial justice. But with regard to King, Father Foley actually spoke out against King because of the Birmingham campaign. I believe it was the Birmingham campaign was the one, I think, where he spoke out against. I don't think it was the Montgomery one, where Foley felt that King was moving too quickly. And so it was hard to find people like Father Tumi who were saying we've got to do what the Supreme Court has itself said, which is to move with all deliberate speed to integrate.
So I had a question that I meant to ask earlier, which is that a common refrain against King was that he was a communist, and it's a funny story about King, where like the joke was that King's telephones were twice as heavy as everyone else's because they're of the bugs that were put in them. He had FBI, like the FBI was, Hoover was just knew he had to be a communist, and the KGB was wondering why he wasn't a communist. And so did Toomey experience this same kind of attack on him, where because
Very
he's
much so.
yeah.
Very much so. Yes. And I will tell you, in my research, I've been told by someone who was present at the time that a certain Jesuit, not Father Tumi, but a certain Jesuit um, permitted the knowingly permitted the FBI to bug a conversation that he had with King. So even some of the Catholics who were in communication with King, at least one of them was in collaboration with the FBI trying to get King. It's very sad. Um, and so with regard to Toomey, one thing that it might help to keep in mind is that when the John Birch Society was founded, which I believe was in the late 50s, and then its membership was cresting in the early 60s. The John Birch Society, which was an extreme anti-communist group, they actually accused Eisenhower of being a communist plant. So the John Birch Society's thinking, which was shared by many people at that time, was that if you're working for racial justice, for any kind of integration, you must be communist because that's what the communists want. And we still see that line of attack being used today against the Holy Father when he speaks about migrants, and against people who were, after the killing of George Floyd, people who were saying Black Lives Matter were instantly, by folks on the right, being tied with communism because, oh, don't you know that the Black Lives Matter organization is, socialist? And it's like, well, wait, just because there's an organization with that name, Black Lives Matter, doesn't mean that everyone who simply makes the statement of truth, Black Lives Matter, is communist. But that's or socialist. But that's the line of attack that was used in Toomey's time, very much against him, even though he was a very strong anti-communist, and it's still being used today, sadly.
Let's see here. We're almost at time here, I guess. But uh I guess anything else you wanted to ask, James?
One last thing I had was, what did his superiors think of all this? You were talking about the Birmingham campaign, and as you were mentioning Catholic figures, I kept checking to see if they were in this book. It's called "Blessed Are the Peacemakers." There's a priest in here named Father Durick, and one of the reasons he was able to go from being a kind of conventional segregationist to being a supporter of King was that he had clearance from the hierarchy. Normally, hierarchy is treated as kind of a bad thing, but the people who were most pressured to remain segregationists were the people who were elected pastors in their Baptist and Presbyterian churches. So, did he get support that kind of backed him up?
Yes, Father Toomey did receive support. It varied at different times. There were he had to ask permission before giving talks. Sometimes he was denied permission, but I have not yet found that when he was denied that it was really because of any like racism on the part of his superiors. There could be other practical reasons why they didn't want him to be overstretched. Um, Father Toomey stayed on the good side of his superiors because he was genuinely deeply rooted in his Jesuit vocation. He took it very seriously. He did not want to do things without obedience. And his superiors recognized, here's someone who's living the constitutions, the Jesuit constitutions, that's their rule. And he was living that rule perfectly. And so, thankfully, those in charge recognized his sincerity, his obedience, and didn't go out of their way to try to stop him.
It kind of ties in with some of the stuff that James has written on MLK and it's these kind of figures are the kind of figures that we definitely should highlight, because of all the
Yes.
negativity that's going on these days. And we're contributing to that negativity, James and I, but it's in order to heal some wounds. I'm trying to heal some wounds so that we can get back to the positivity. But
May I just say a word about my Kickstarter? Just
yeah, I was
Yeah,
actually just going to
plug.
bring up the Kickstarter. Yes.
oh,
Plug
thank you.
away. Let's
Thank
get this
you.
funded.
Thank you. So if you're listening to this before September 14th, then I'd just like to let you know that I have a Kickstarter for A Priest in Good Trouble, my biography of Father Tumi. And this is to enable me to complete the writing of it. As I mentioned, I have a contract with the University of Notre Dame Press. I have to turn in the manuscript by the end of January. But the only way that I can complete it is if I raise the funds to support myself during that time of writing. So if this sounds like something that you would like to support, then I invite you to check out my Kickstarter, which I'm sure you can find through the links associated with this podcast, or if you just look up Kickstarter for A Priest in Good Trouble, or for my name, Dawn Eden Goldstein, I'm sure you'll find it. So thank you.
Well, we can actually we can't put links on the YouTube for some reason, but we can.
They're worried that we might be, a spam account. So you have to be around for a certain amount of time, and but we will tweet it out.
Yeah, we'll tweet
That's
it out for you. Yeah, that's
I
right.
appreciate it.
So we encourage everybody to chip in. This is a very worthwhile project that she's doing, and we also encourage you to buy her previous book on Father Ed, the story of Bill W.'s spiritual sponsor, the person who started the AA. His spiritual sponsor, this Father Ed, was a very interesting guy. This was a award-winning book that Don wrote as well. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to Why Postliberalism Failed. My name's James Patterson, and of course we had Thomas Howes, and we are very grateful to our guest today, Dr. Dawn Eden Goldstein. I got it right at the end, which is not when it matters. Go ahead, Tom.
No. She's also a canon lawyer. You gotta get.
Yeah. She's a canon lawyer. I have to do the thing. I used to make fun of this, but don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon if you watch us on YouTube. We're also on iTunes and
retweet
Spotify.
us.
Retweet and donate to the Kickstarter for our very special guest today and her wonderful cause for writing. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next week.